Hello, good evening. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Miguel Amado. I am the director of SIRIUS Art Centre, an organization based in Cove, County Cork, Ireland. And it's my pleasure and honor to welcome Professor Boris Groys to this Zoom meeting. And I want to thank him immediately for the opportunity that we are all having here to listen to his thoughts and for his time and generosity in sharing those thoughts with us. This event is part of an online series that SIRIUS Art Centre has been organizing in collaboration with an organization based in Portugal called Rampa. And it has been convened by myself and my colleague Alexandra Balona, who is here with us as well. And we'll introduce ourselves in a few minutes. And this event and this online series is organized in parallel with an exhibition by the artist and filmmaker Anton Vidokle called Citizens of the Cosmos, which brings together a selection of his films which have been engaging with themes associated with Russian Cosmism. And Professor Boris Groys is a prominent scholar on art and theory related to different fields of research and thinking, but also Russian Cosmism. And he has had the opportunity not only of writing several times on the topic, but also of organizing and editing volumes and even in exhibitions. So thank you so much again, Professor Boris Groys. I will hand over to Alexandra and then we can start. Thank you so much for your time and I look forward to the conversation we are going to have.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Thank you very much, Boris Groys. It is a pleasure to host you. Boris Groys will present his lecture entitled The Cosmic Human Rights. Boris Groys is an art critic, media theorist and philosopher. He is Global Distinguished Professor of Russian and Slavic Studies at New York University, Senior Research Fellow at the Karlsruhe University of Art and Design, and Professor of Philosophy at the European Graduate School. Thank you so much. It's a great honor to have you as a keynote speaker in this event series, and we are looking forward to hear your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here. I actually visited Porto once in my life and have best memories from this time. It was a short time, but interesting one. And I have good memories of wonderful landscapes. Yeah, that I saw here for the city. It was really very nice. So I start. In the first manifesto from the year 1922, the representatives of biocosmists, a political group from the sphere of Russian anarchism, wrote, and I quote, "We take the essential and real right of man to be, the right to exist, immortality, resurrection, rejuvenation, and the freedom to move in cosmic space, and not the supposed rights announced when the bourgeois revolution was declared in 1789. Alexander Svetogor, one of the leading biocosmic theoreticians, took immortality to be at once the goal and the prerequisite for a future communist society, since true social solidarity could only reign among immortals. Death separates people. Private property cannot truly be eliminated if every human being owns a private piece of time. But the first proclamation of the new cosmic human rights was staged by the radical Russian avant-garde even earlier, through the performance of the mystery opera Victory Over the Sun in the year 1913. At the writing and staging of which the most prominent members of Russian avant-garde movement of the time participated: Kazimir Malevich, Vladimir Khlebnikov, Alexei Kryuchenek, and Mikhail Matushin. It was actually the beginning of the avant-garde movement in Russia. Here we find all the biocosmos topics, capturing the sun and liberating the earth from gravity, establishing of the revolutionary anarchy instead of the traditional cosmic order. One can say that one finds no idea of immortality in the opera, but the text of the opera begins with the words, "Everything is good, that begins good and never ends." Even if an individual is mortal, the reign of anarchy will never end, and men, at least 4 strong men who capture the sun, these 4 strong men obviously are the 4 authors of the opera, obviously will also never end because they made the sun to the eternal prisoner. The Russian Cosmism has nothing to do with the semitization of the cosmic feeling, kind of new age mentality, unity with the cosmos and other kinds of mystical experience as we know them, for example, from theosophy that emerged actually also in Russia and around the same time, was initiated by Blavatsky famously. For the Russian Cosmism, the nature was not a friend, but an enemy, because nature let men die. One can even say, kill them. Similar to Marxism, the Russian cosmists understood philosophy not as an explanation of things as they are, but as a project of their transformation. But contrary to Marxism, they relied not on the natural development of technology, but tried to envision a new technology, radically different from the existing one. Here, philosophy begins to move into the terrain of science fiction and tendency that we can watch also in our time. The art of the avant-garde, as it is well known, also often bordered on science fiction. The artists tried to liberate themselves from the past as far as it was possible and create the art, not from the actual audience that was still infected by the bacilli of the past, but from the mankind of the future, the mankind to come. But here the following question emerges: will the mankind exist in the future at all? And if yes, how it will live? This question did not have a clear and evident answer. God was already proclaimed dead by Nietzsche, and the survival of the mankind lost its ontological guarantee. The humans became delivered to the cosmic forces that did not care about the further existence. The cosmic order was understood as regulated by the force of gravity, but gravity can also lead to a destruction of life. For example, in the form of asteroid that would hit the Earth. So it seemed that if art and culture in general were created not for the present, but for the future audience, then one should take measures to guarantee the existence of this audience. However, to protect the Earth and its population means to liberate the mankind from the blind force of gravity. It was necessary and urgent also because gravity presented itself as a burden of the past, a cultural burden of the past that the avant-garde art tried to cast down. This connection, so connection between cosmic gravity and cultural gravity, was established already in the course of the 19th century. In this respect, the religion of humanity is symptomatic. That was proposed by Auguste Comte in 1851 in his book, System of Positive Polity, with a subtitle, Treatise on Sociology, Instituting the Religion of Humanity. Already at the beginning of the book, Comte formulates the main principle of the new religion. Reason must be subjected to sentiment, to feeling. It was, of course, a reaction to the shock of the French Revolution and its religion of reason that culminated in terror. So reason must be subjected to sentiment, to feeling. The social sentiment is what keeps humanity together and prevents war and violence. Yeah? However, the social sentiment has its limitations. According to Comte, the intensification of the social sentiment leads to communism. But communism destroys a human society that, as we learn now, is based, after all, not on the sentiment, but on the power of gravity. The individual human existence depends on the social order, and the social order is based on the cosmic order. Comte reminds us that Newton has shown that we live under the same laws of gravity, under which the celestial bodies are moving. That it is primarily the gravitational forces that keep our society together and keep it at Earth, yeah? And order it. The communist revolution would be a revolution against gravity, and as such, doomed to fail. Comte writes that the religion of humanity can be considered as the only true religion because it implies the veneration of something that undeniably exists. And only the humanity truly exists. But if the actual existence of humanity here and now is a fact, its existence in the future is a matter of faith, of the social myth, and that's why religion and not simply science. The social myth, the secular religion, is necessary for our actions, because if we would not believe that the humanity will further exist, all our plans and projects will lose its horizon of realizability. However, this faith relies not on the facts, but only on the social sentiments, because we cannot predict facts. Yeah? The forces of gravity cannot prevent a cosmic catastrophe that could destroy the humanity in its entirety. The anticipation of such a possibility, Comte says, makes the religion of humanity even more intense. So the fear of death, a common death, brings us to believe in humanity in a kind of religious way, yeah, intense religious way. But what is the source of this faith? Only the social sentiment can be such a source. But the social sentiment minus gravity means communism. It is a strange paradox of Comte's theory and faith. Comte was extremely popular in Russia in the pre-revolutionary period, maybe most popular also. Thus, Anatoly Lunacharsky, the first minister, Commissar of Culture after the October Revolution, explicitly thematized the relationship between communism and gravity in his History of Religions in 2 volumes, written immediately before the revolution. Lunacharsky wrote that Comte's religion of humanity was the highest form of the religious thinking because it included some crucial elements of materialism, but also that Comte's philosophy was reactionary because it was anti-communist. And then Lunacharsky writes further that Newtonian model of gravitation is obsolete. Referring to Nietzsche as well as new achievements of physics, Lunacharsky writes that the cosmos is not an order, but chaos, that in the cosmic space, many forces operate that oppose and fight each other, that humans are also fighters, and the most powerful force wins the battle. Thus, Lunacharsky professes his disbelief in the power of gravity as defining cosmic and social order, and established, of course, the close connection, relationship between the protest against gravity and cosmic order on one hand, and hope for the revolution and change of the social order on the other hand. Now, this connection between cosmic order and social order is central for the thinking of many intellectuals and artists before and after the Russian Revolution. It's really the crucial point. Thus, Nikolai Fedorov, in an essay, Astronomy and Architecture, written at the end of the 19th century, calls for changing the trajectory of the movement of Earth through the universe. The Earth should cease to be a satellite of the Sun. Here we see the same protest against the Sun in the work of futurists, and be turned into a cosmic ship that would travel freely, free from the power of gravity, through the cosmic space. Fedorov writes about the Earth, and I quote, "It will begin sailing the celestial seas with the sum total of the human race rendered as captain, crew, and maintenance staff of this Earth ship." End of quotation. The energy for this free movement will come from the sun. After all, Fedorov writes further, I quote, "Imagine now that the energy sent to the Earth by the sun, which presently scatters off into space, could instead be conducted onto the Earth, thanks to a massive configuration of lightning-rod aerostats, implements that will drive solar light to our planet. Imagine that the solar energy, once directed earthward, might alter the density of this new home, weaken the bonds of its gravity, giving rise in turn to the possibility of manipulating its celestial force through the heavens, rendering the planet Earth, in effect, a great electric bolt." End of quotation. That shows that Fedorov sees the victory over the gravity as a way to a new order imposed on the universe by the human will and human technology. To create this new order, the human should be liberated from the power of nature that manifests itself in gravity, sexuality, and death. That is why Fedorov wanted to turn the Earth into the museum of the mankind, in which every human being will get a guarantee of immortality through conservation and restoration, analogous to those of the artworks. On the first glance, the images of ships and museums seem to be very different, even opposing each other. But here one can remember the notion of heterotopic space coined by Michel Foucault. Foucault applies this notion to the museum and to the ship. According to Foucault, both are the heterotopic spaces in which time accumulates. As a result of this museumification of humanity, one reaches not only the freedom from gravity, but also the total biopower, the power of the nature of death. This total biopower includes also a possibility and even obligation to resurrect all the earlier generations by technological means. This signifies the collectivization not only of space, but also of time. In eternity, the conflicts between individuals and society will be eliminated that could not be eliminated in time. The goal of immortality and resurrection is the highest goal for every individual, because every individual wants to live. Yeah? That is a basic desire. For this reason, the individual will always remain faithful to a society if the society makes this individual own immortality for its goal. At the same time, only such a trans-temporal society can make it possible for people to experience life not only without special limitations imposed by private property, but also without temporal limitations. The communist society of immortals should be also interplanetary. That is, it should occupy and control the entire space of the universe. Otherwise, the security of the mankind cannot be guaranteed. The theological guarantee is substituted here by the technological guarantee. But who would be able to give such a guarantee? Socialism promised perfected social justice. But socialism also associated this promise with a belief in progress. The latter implied that only the future generations would live in an advanced socialist society and enjoy social justice. The generation of the past and of today, by contrast, are left with playing the role of the passive victims of progress. There would be no eternal justice for them. Thus, future generations would enjoy the social justice only at the price of cynical acceptance of an outrageous historical injustice, the exclusion of all previous generations from the realm of the future. Socialism, thus, functions an exploitation of the dead in favor of the living, and as an exploitation of those alive today in favor of those who will live later. The socialism of the future can only present itself as a just society if it sets itself the goal of the artificial resurrection of all the generations that establish the foundation, historical foundation for its success. The perfect socialism must be established not only in space, but also in time. But can we find a technology that would not be subjected to the logic of progress, understood as a substitution of the old things by the new ones? Fedorov asserted that such a technology is a technology of preservation of documents and artworks in the museum. So technology of art. As Fedorov correctly writes, the very existence of the museum contradicts the utilitarian, pragmatic spirit of modernity. That is, because the museum preserves with great care precisely the useless, superfluous things of the past that no longer have any practical use in real life. So they functionalize things. The museum does not accept the death and decline of these things after they already fulfill their function. And they are accepted and not accepted anymore in real life. Thus, the museum is fundamentally at odds with progress. The museum is a machine for making things last, making them immortal. Because each human being is also a body among other bodies, a thing among other things, humans can also be blessed with the immortality of the museum. For Fedorov, immortality is not a paradise for human souls, but a museum for living human bodies. The divine grace is replaced by curatorial decisions and the technology of museum preservation. Technology as a whole must become the technology of art. Just as a museum administration is responsible not only for the general holdings of the museum's collection, but also for the intact state of every given work of art, making certain that the individual artworks are subjected to conservation when they threaten to decay. The state should bear responsibility for the resurrection and continued life of every individual human person. This way of overcoming of the boundaries between life and death does not introduce art into life, but transforms life into art. The human history will become the art history because every human being will become an artwork. And thus, the human will see the origin not in nature, in the human biology, also not in sexuality and change of generation, but in art, in the art technology. Okay, that was it.
Okay, Professor Boris Groys, thank you so much for your lecture and for your thoughtful words. So many things to consider and think about, and so many topics. I mean, we could follow, of course, that the debate is open to everyone. So everyone is more than welcome to intervene. We don't need to make the session too formal. So if you want to just open your mic, camera, and ask a question, feel free. I can start, and then maybe Alexandra, and then everyone is more than welcome, as I just said. There are a few things, thank you so much again, Professor Boris Groys. There are a few things that I could start from, from the Biocosmist Manifesto and ideas that communist society could only be achieved within questions of, within the state of immortality. But I would like to maybe to explore or ask you a question more specifically about the connection that you have made between the image of the museum and of the ship, when you spoke about it as spaces of utopia in line with Foucault, and the question of biopower and the connection of biopower with death, and necropolitics, as has been advanced by more recent thinkers. The power of determining who lives and who dies is the power of today. So maybe, of course, because the question of death and resurrection are connected within Russian Cosmism, but it was actually by listening to you now that the idea of biopower attached to that was, for me, kind of brought together. So maybe you could explore a little bit this, and also the idea of the ship and the museum, if possible.
Well, let me begin with a more general question of care. Yeah, so I think what is important here is a beginning or announcement of a certain shift from the society of work to the society of care. Mm. If you look at the industrial revolution of the 19th century, it led to a radical industrialization, at the same time objectification of the human body. And human body was understood as object that should be used. Yeah, human body was understood as a source of energy, an object, a source of energy. In a way, in a radical way, that was not possible, also technologically and politically not possible before. Yeah, so we have here a real shift from understanding of human being as a soul to the human being as a body. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now it is a body of work. But with the rise of socialist movements, with the rise or maybe Nietzsche and Freud and other theories at the end of 19th century, we have a certain shift from understanding the human body from the body of work to the body of care. You know? Socialism is a program of caring about the human body. And then the question is, how far? Yeah. And what's interesting about that is this. If human body is a body of work, a productive body, yeah. Also in sexuality, it is so. In sexuality, it is so, a body of work. Then its energy, its activity, its work always has an end. This end is an act of production. Yeah, so you get a result. You give birth to a child. You, I don't know. You create. You write a book. Yeah, you create a painting or a film. Yeah. Okay. And at that moment, your work ends. Yeah, so it's always final. But if you begin to care about human body when your work ends, we can say this work ends when this body dies. Yeah, okay. So the death is the end of the work of care. But the work of care does not presuppose death as its result. Yeah. So if you think about productive and creative work, there is a harmony between the work itself that has a certain telos, a certain goal, and the result. If you speak about work of care, there is a disparity and contradiction between the project of care, yeah, and its result, which is death. So I would suggest that biocosmism and cosmic thinking in general, and especially Fedorov, is a semitization of this contradiction. So if I practice care, I practice immortality and infinity. So the work of care is intrinsically infinite. It doesn't have a goal. It doesn't have telos. When it is interrupted externally. Yeah? Okay. Now, if you look at boat and museum, it's the same. Yeah. So, boat is just swimming, yeah, until it drowned. A museum is functioning and caring about the artworks until maybe a bomb is thrown at it. So we have this, and Foucault speaks about this analogy. We speak about these specific activities, all of them in one way or another, activities of care, that do not have intrinsic goals, that are not teleological by their nature. And these non-teleological, potentially infinite activities, that is something that suddenly becomes a problem in a society that on the one hand wants to care, but on the other hand accepts death. It's interesting that Foucault says that when biopolitics ends, religion begins. Yeah, in his text about religion, he said that the corpse does not belong to the social order. A corpse is something that is given back to family. Yeah, and in the sense, it's private. So but of course, it's not true, because museum is a graveyard, is a cemetery. not only symmetry is a symmetry, but a library is a symmetry, museum is a symmetry, university is a form of symmetry. Yeah, because we're reading and teaching old authors and so on and so on. So we are living not only in society of living, but also in society of the dead. And it is something that is often overlooked. What Russian cosmists tried to do is not to overlook that. Of course, they radicalized all these ideas, yeah, and presented them in fantastic terms. But the problem is very, very real. It's actually a problem of our time, because our time was to be a time of care, yeah. And with pandemics and all of that, the problems of care become central.
Alexandra, do you want to ask a question, or I can ask? Or Anton, do you want to ask make a comment?
Do you want to ask Anton?
No, you go first.
Okay, just maybe following up on what you just said, Professor. So on this idea of the ship that is powered by the sun, for example, it seems there is a teleological idea of this technology of resurrection or immortality. So for Fedorov, on the one hand, it seemed to me that imagining this Earth as a ship that is powered by the sun, this seems there's kind of a paradox between a goal. So this technology has a goal of continually resurrecting the past lives and all the others that would come. But on the other hand, the museum was seen, he considered the museum as a space where time could be stopped, where it could be a non-teleological space, where we could combine different temporalities. So, yeah, in a way, it seems also a bit interesting and at the same time paradoxical, because, for example, this ship that is powered by the sun, did the cosmists ever thought that the sun as a star could end? That this energy, this source of energy could at some time disappear? And how I don't know if maybe you could comment on this.
Yes, of course, it's completely absurd. Yeah, the idea is completely absurd and should not be taken very seriously. What was important for Fedorov here, and for example, this text very much inspired Malevich, yeah, who tried to invent some kinds of cosmic ships that would, at the same time, function as a studio. He said what he wants to do is to remain in his studio and then to turn the studio into a car, then to turn the studio into a plane, then to turn the studio into a cosmic ship, and so to travel everywhere without leaving his studio. That is a very good interpretation of this idea of Fedorov. It is a dream of being everywhere without leaving your home. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Because it is like care and death, they are contradictory. We have these two contradictory desires to visit everything, to be everywhere, but not to leave our home. We now satisfy this desire by Zoom. Yeah. That is a contemporary form of biocosmism, yeah, of course. but it is also something that happens more imagination than reality. Yeah. Okay, and actually happens also by the use of electricity, and the electricity is also finite, can be exhausted, and then this movement would be impossible. But what is important for me to stress is that immortality is not a goal. Death can be a goal. Production can be a goal. Because when you achieve something, for example, a glorious death, for example, suicide, for example, sacrifice, for example, an artwork, for example, a political success, when you achieve something, you achieve the end. What's interesting, because you have a result, you have a telos is here, so your effort has ended. Yeah. But the activity of the museum curator, and curator comes from care, from cura. Yeah. The function of curator is basically infinite. Yeah, you never presuppose the end of this kind of activity. Like, for example, you say, okay, the Earth breaks from the area of gravity it is now, and then what happens? It is an open question. It can happen that there will be no energy, as you say, and so on. But the goal is eternal movement. Yeah, and maybe you realize, so you can, so to say, achieve this goal in a certain way. You can only move. I think that is a very different distinction between activities that are immanently, intrinsically final, like sexuality, for example. That's why Fedorov didn't like it. And activities that are basically infinite, they can be interrupted, but they can be fulfilled. Yeah.
Okay, Barbat, you raised your hand.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Boris.
Hi, Barbat.
Yeah, it's been years. Yeah, it's really good to see you. I miss you so much. So, as you know, I'm card-carrying Malevichian, so I want to go back to 1913 for my questions, if you allow me. One is that it's not been even written, I think, in French or English, is Malevich's federalism. Didn't everything start with that? Negation of reason, the dominant culture, and signification, and all that, even before the appropriated Mona Lisa painting, his manifesto on that broken piece of wood, and so forth. And you said that the idea was absurd about the whole idea, but I think in your essay, which is about failure, failure is internal to the avant-garde. I think that is a better definition. And finally, is it just a coincidence that Andrei Bieli's Petersburg, the novel, was written in 1913, because the father, the character in the novel, is quite obsessed with shapes, and especially quadrats, all kinds of them. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Yeah, Andrei Bieli, who wrote this novel, St. Petersburg, he was also a follower and student of Vladimir Solovyov, and Vladimir Solovyov was actually at the beginning of this whole discourse. Actually, you can find in Solovyov this formulation that care is a principle of infinity. And this opposition between care and sexuality, care is about infinity, sexuality is about finite practice and all of that. So many ideas you can find there, but it's also, of course, idea of explosion. This kind of nothingness. You know, it's interesting that Bely was, if you are interested in Bely, his father was a mathematician. And as a mathematician, he wrote about the mathematical theory of explosions. It's also not irrelevant here. And then Bely moves from the theoretical reflection on explosion to the terrorist explosion. Yeah, for him, realization of this radical explosivity is a figure of a terrorist. There is a certain connection between both theories and a contradiction. I think there is a contradiction between Bely and Malevich precisely in this formula, what begins good and never ends. Yeah. So explosion, Benjamin speaks about that and many other authors, is the experience of a moment. It is momentous experience that has no past and no future. And futurist, it is explosion that has a future. Yeah, this explosion is not a terrorist explosion, but a revolutionary explosion. And the difference between terrorism and revolution is that terrorism is actually a celebration of the moment, and revolution is an attempt of the beginning. It begins that potentially has also no end. You know, as October Revolution happened, nobody thought about the end of it. Yeah, socialism was not thought as something that has to have an end. That is also important dimension also. So the thinking of infinity and infinite project is very important.
Thank you, Professor. Anton?
Yes, Boris, I actually have I just thought of a very obvious question that we never discussed. How did you learn about Cosmism? I learned about Cosmism from you. So that kind of got me into 10 years of work. Yeah, but how did you learn about this? Because it was actually not, you know, it was somewhat suppressed and not a typical thing to come across.
Well, yeah, suppressed, but not quite suppressed. So in my young years, in the 1960s, 1970s, 1960s, yeah, Russian literature from the pre-revolutionary, revolutionary time was circulating not officially, but unofficially, very much so. And in Leningrad, where I was living, I read everything. I read the whole canon of Russian philosophy from Vladimir Solovyov to Shestov, and also Cosmism, but early Cosmism, yeah, of course, at that time. And of course, Vernadsky, Tsiolkovsky, the philosophical texts were all accessible, you know, unofficially in certain circles, that was everything there. And then as I moved to to Moscow, I also met people who were very much involved. I was not close to them, but I met people who were very much involved in this общее дело, in this common task activity. So maybe officially it's not so present, but you know, unofficial culture was actually very developed, and people who were interested could get everything.
I have spoken about this with, well, both with Monastyrsky and with Kabakov, yeah. And it's actually quite interesting. Andrei Monastyrsky, at first, he said that he never read Fedorov, doesn't know anything about this. It has absolutely no influence on his work, zero, yeah. And then, strangely enough, he said, well, yes, actually, in 1970s, he was reading a lot of Fedorov. So there is a kind of a completely contradictory answer, yeah. That on the one hand, he doesn't know anything about it. On the other hand, he was very interested in it. With Kabakov, it's something else. He says that he is totally aware of it, but he completely rejects it because for him, it's as bad as communism because it reduces individual human to like a grain of sand in this gigantic universe. So human life has no value because it's so small, yeah? He sees the project of Cosmism as essentially anti-humanistic, yeah. And these two people are probably your most important conversationists or conversants in the Soviet Union in the 70s, no?
No, not at all.
No?
Not at all. Not at all. I began to be interested in all of this stuff in Petersburg as I was in the middle of 60s, in 65, 66. And I didn't hear anything about Kabakov from Monastyrsky at that time. And, you know, if you look at many people, especially in Moscow, yeah, because it was a bit different in Petersburg, in Leningrad, they rejected everything Russian together with everything Soviet, together with everything communist. They felt themselves isolated from the West, and they wanted to absorb Western ideas, or at least non-Russian ideas. Like, for example, Buddhism. But Buddhism was, of course, California Buddhism, yeah, and not real Chinese Buddhism or Japanese Buddhism. And all these ideas from the West, they actually hated even Russian avant-garde because Russian avant-garde was seen as a precursor of communism. They hated Malevich, they hated all of that. I had already in Leningrad completely different perspective on all of that. I was interested in Russia. And I was interested in Russian culture and what is specific for the Russian culture and what Russian culture can offer, what the Western culture cannot. Yeah. So I had always a feeling of, maybe it has to do with my background. I didn't go to the school. Yeah, I was in home because of my medical condition. And I was reading only French and English literature. I never read anything Russian, yeah, during my school time. So as I entered university, I began to be interested in Russia, yeah, because I met people, yeah. I went to Koktebel, I met people from the Theosophic and Anthroposophic societies. I met people in Petersburg that came from labor camps and knew all this stuff, yeah, and all that. So I began to be interested in Russia, and I still am interested in Russia, but maybe from a certain kind of foreign point of view, yeah. For me, it was extremely exotic, strange culture. It was not my culture. It was strange, exotic culture, very fascinating. And I must confess that my attitude toward Kabakov is absolutely the same. So, whatever he thinks about that, for me, he's a very Russian phenomenon, like also. And he's interesting for me because he's very Russian. And Monastyrsky is very Russian. So I was always interested in Russianness. But I was interested in Russianness as specific culture form that is basically non-Western. Everything that was Western in Russia, I was not interested in it because I think in the West it would be better. So I was interested only in what was specifically Russian. And I would say Russian cosmism is a very much Russian phenomenon. Why is it Russian phenomenon? Because it is a fact of the Russian Orthodox Church. If you look at the West, yeah, then what is a body in the West? It's an object, and everybody is against objectification. If you read Sartre, for example, Being and Nothingness, he's ashamed of being an object. He's ashamed of having a body. So the Western subject is ashamed to have a body because body is used. It's something that can be appreciated from external point of view, used and judged upon. And it's shocking. So it's a Western tradition of Catholicism and Protestantism that believes in subject and despises the object. Yeah, that's why feminism is about not to be objectified. Yeah, also. If you look at the Russian tradition, so Byzantine tradition, Orthodox tradition, it is better to be an object than to be a subject. I only once found this formulation in Nietzsche. Nietzsche writes in his Birth of Tragedy out of Spirit of Music that it's much better to be an artwork than to be an artist. So it's better to be an object. Why? Because according to Orthodox Church, God does not love you because you have a soul. Because your soul is always sinful. Yeah, people all are terrible. They're sinful. And actually, if you look at the soul of the people, they all should be sent to hell. But God looks at the people and loves them because of their body. It's a kind of aesthetic, caring view of the human bodies. That is why it is better for somebody to be a body, because then you are loved by God, and then to be a subject, because if you are a subject, you are only criticized, you compete, and you are hated by the others. Yeah, as a subject, we are hated, but as a body, we can be loved. If you look at the whole literature at the beginning, end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century, you find this idea. You find this idea, Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. It is a main idea in Bakhtin. It is a main idea here in Fedorov and so on and so on. So it is completely irrelevant what kind of soul you have. It's only relevant that you have a body. And because you have a body, you can be liked, you can be loved, you can be cared about. As far as you have a soul, you rather have to be criticized for that. So you have a completely different background. And because of this different background, and you find this background everywhere, there's no one text At the 19th century, beginning of 20th century, that does not reflect this opposition in a way that I described it. You have this phenomenon, a specifically Russian phenomenon. Specifically Russian, of course, Florensky who also wrote on that, and also wrote on that in the sense I described it, said it's all Byzantine, it's all Greek, it's not Russian, so Russia is irrelevant, only Greek Byzantine tradition is relevant, it's only one thing that is good in Russia and not the Russian people. Okay, maybe it is so. In any case, it is non-Western. Yeah, it is specific product of post-Platonic post-Platonic contemplation and contemplative position of Russian Orthodox Church that was anti-Aristotelian. Yeah, if you look at the Aristotle, it's about subject. If you look at Plato, it's about object. And the main author for the East was Plato and Neoplatonism, and for the West, Aristotle and Protestantism. So the great divide. And I was always interested in that. My relationship to the artists like Kabakov and so on was also totally defined by this interest in the difference. And this difference is a theological difference in the first place.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was really interesting to have this brief history of your encounter with and Anton's through you with Russian Cosmism, but also the 19th century and the roots, actually, how rooted they are within Russian ethos. We have a question from Anna. Anna, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, hello, nice to meet you. Thank you so much, Professor Boris Groys. Thank you so much for your lecture. It was, I was astonished with some of these theses. For example, with this thesis when this immortalism is not a goal, it's infinitive production. It's for me, it's absolutely brilliant. For me, it's absolutely source for thinking, for imagination. And my question is, it's interesting contradiction when you say that socialism is in its root, it's based on this oppressed past, it's based on this oppression by living ones, by living proletarians, oppression of dead ones, dead proletarians, of all these centuries of oppression. And at the same time, you said in discussion, you are saying in discussions that socialism as well as immortalism is an unfinished project without a concrete aim, without final, without this absolute finity. So maybe my question is, I'm thinking about it after Benjamin or after Muravyov, maybe socialism itself, if its infinite project has this root of resurrection, maybe it has it in its plan, maybe it has it in its imagination. How do you suppose, maybe if possible?
Yes, of course. You know, they were all, also Fedorov and all of them and Solovyov, they were very much influenced by Freud and by the concept of delay. So what is the principle of progress and principle of Western life in general? It is a problem of delay. So I have a desire. This desire is delayed. People tell me, you know, you have to work to make money, and then when you make money, you buy it. Yeah, you have to delay the realization of your desire until you create a condition to satisfy it. Yeah. The question is how far this delay should go. It can happen that I never, ever would have enough money to satisfy my desire. Yeah. So I spent my whole life and I do not satisfy. So when my basic desire is to live, yeah, and I somehow, to live happy, yeah, to live happy. Then I delay this desire for the next generation. I say, I'm living unhappy, but maybe my children will live happy. Then children delay their desire to be happy. The same, we are not happy, but maybe the next will be happy, and so on and so on. So what is bad about communism, socialism, is a promise of happiness. The promise of happiness and satisfaction destroys communism. One of my friends, or rather acquaintance, a very famous and important official Soviet philosopher of that time, told me, you know, Boris, why church still exists and Soviet power will collapse? Because Soviet power tells people at certain point in time you will be happy, and it never comes. And Catholic Church says you will be always unhappy. And that is the case. So people believe the church and do not believe the socialism. Now, the promise that Christ gives to as compensation from this delay is a return and resurrection. So yes, I am unhappy, my children are happy for, I don't know, many thousand years. But at the end, Christ will come and will resurrect me. And this 2,000 years, 3,000 years, 10,000 years are irrelevant for me because this time I'm in the grave, yeah, so I do not suffer. And socialism does not give this promise, that is problem. So I live, I suffer, I work for the next generation, but never will come to me and resurrect me and give me any happiness. Yeah? And that undermines my faith into the project. Yes, it is an infinite project, but my life is finite. That is a problem. The project of socialism is infinite, and my life is finite. And so I have a feeling they are incommensurable. And I have nothing from this socialism at the end. That is a problem. And Fedorov believed that to compensate this means to promise a resurrection, yeah, as a compensation for this incommensurability because infinite character of the project and finiteness of my life.
Thank you so much. We have a question here in the chat by Fedor. Fedor, do you want to speak up or do you want me to read? Okay, I think I'm going to read. So, okay, he's saying, so he has two questions. One is more a comment and the one is a very specific question. So I'll start with the specific question. Professor Boris Groys, do you have any thoughts on Ukrainian avant-garde and Ukrainian cosmism as a phenomenon within the context of cosmism in general, Russian cosmism in general? And the other question is whether or not, to what extent Russian cosmism was influential in the work of philosopher Bogdanov, specifically on techtology.
Yeah. First question, I must say simply, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not informed enough to make a judgment. In relationship to Bogdanov, yes, in two aspects. First of all, technology is organizational science, yeah, science of organization. And he believed that is actually the goal of the artist, basically, to organize. So prolet cult was based on the idea that the function of artist is organization, is to give a form to society. Yeah, what is organization? Is giving a form to a society. And form giving is a general artistic activity. And of course, it is very much idea related to Solovyov and to Cosmism, to all of that, yeah. So it's very, very close. And then he also believed in a theory of regeneration through the blood exchange. So he believes that if old people exchange their blood with the young people, then old people will be rejuvenated through that. There are actually some experiments that confirm that. And he died during one of these experiments. So he believed also in this rejuvenation. You remember 3 biocosmic requirements was immortality, free movement in cosmos, also rejuvenation. Yeah, so rejuvenation was what he was actually practicing.
Professor Boris, I would like to come back to your idea of a body of care, which was one of the, if I understood correctly, one of the cosmists' purposes, considering immortality as a task, a common task without telos, without end, if I understood correctly. I would like to ask you if that can relate, or how can that relate to the idea of potentiality in contrast with activity, this dichotomy, this Aristotelian dichotomy, and Agamben also brings this this idea of potentiality as political ethos. Or a kind of political praxis, that to try to imagine politics without, or an action without telos, without goal. So I don't know if there's, if you can comment or bring your perspective on this.
Yeah, I think it's a question, it's a thinking against the concept of potentiality. Potentiality means that we can do only what is possible to do. So to do something, there must be a possibility to do something. If there is no possibility to do something, then you don't know, then you cannot do it. Yeah. So the concept of potentiality and possibility is ontological way, and in certain way, theological way of thinking, because potential is what is ontologically possible, or what the divine reason made possible for us. But in fact, doing something, we don't know if it is possible or not. Yeah, that is a point. The idea that by doing something, we are able to rely on a certain kind of potentiality, I think it is a traditional ontological, theological idea. We are taking risk. Yeah, when we are doing something, we're always taking risk. And we always taking risk that what we are doing is impossible. And even we maybe prefer to do something that is impossible, yeah, and not what is possible and potentially. That is because also the impossibility of something, yeah, lack of potential for it, made this activity potentially infinite, yeah. The paradox, the impossibility, opens the way for infinity. That is why, 68th slogan, be realist makes the impossible, requires the impossible. So only the impossible is actually realistic. Why? Because impossible leaves you with what are you practically doing. Yeah, it doesn't rely on anything that ontologically or theologically would be possible or potentially possible.
Thank you. We have another question by Catherine.
Catherine.
Would you like to ask the question, please?
Yeah, it's John and Catherine. Yeah, my question goes back to two comments you made. One about when you're talking about the infinite and finitude and telos, and the idea of suicide and stuff was a finite thing or was a goal. And then also the influence of Freud on Russian Cosmism, and how I tied him is that like the death drive in Freud, and is that something that's aimed at finitude versus desire and the libido, which is like something infinite? And do any of the Russian cosmists think in terms of libido versus thanatos, like versus death drive? They think of that as sort of like do they think of terms in like, a life affirming philosophy versus a death orientated philosophy, or suicide and stuff? So yeah, that's sort of my question. Is quite garbled, but the influence of Freud would be the thing I'm interested in when you mentioned it. And yeah, that'd be good. I enjoyed the talk. Thanks.
I never understood death drive in Freud, because he described death drive as going back, as a kind of regression, as going back to the origin, and at the same time as mineralization, going back to the inanimate, let's say. I never understood that, because it's not going back. It's simply life. I mean, we live and then we turn into a corpse, and that is corpse dissolves, and the mineralization happens. I simply do not understand why death drive is not simply a description of our life as it is, but some specific drive leading us back in time. I think death drive is simply what we are doing is death drive. We are with any moment, also moment as we are speaking, we live through this death drive because it brings us closer to our death. Now, speaking about desire, that is important because, of course, Nietzsche and Freud describe body as body of desire. Body of desire. And that is something that Solovyov partially accepts, but let's say, Cosmism, Fedorov totally rejects. Yeah, he rejects understanding of the human body as body of desire because he understands that as a body of care. And the body of care is not a body of desire. I don't know if you spend some time in a hospital, yeah, people don't ask you what you want. They say, forget what you want. You have to do what you are told to do, yeah? Because we care about you. And because we care about you, your desires are irrelevant here. You have something like a basic desire. This basic desire is to live. And caring about you, we satisfy this basic desire. But all other desires, you have to forget it, because all the other desires are actually not good for your health. Yeah? Only the desire to live is good for your health. But every other desire is bad for your health. And this is, of course, the main principle of Fedorov. You have to reject libido. You have to reject sexuality, because sexuality involves you into conflict, into calamities, and it's also produce children, and produce children, it's the end of it. Yeah? So it's already for Slaviota case. So if you want to live, you have to remain with this one desire and to reject everything else. You know?
Okay, so we have, Professor, maybe you have a few more minutes. We have a question here from Pedro, and then I would like also to ask a final question if we have time. So Pedro is asking, can we still talk about a subversive dimension in art after the avant-garde, where the new is already here as we, between inverted commas, fly in this cosmos ship, which locked us all in a new dictatorship of time? Is it possible, or what it is today, revolutionary art?
Yes, of course, yeah. But you have to ask what revolution is.
Mm.
A revolution is a revolution. So it is return.
Mm.
Revolution is a return. And if you look at our ideas today, they all are related to maintenance, care, and return. For example, to return to nature and keep nature intact, to keep the traditions, cultural traditions intact, to redefine our identities, yeah, also cultural identities and sexual identities. The word identity is it means already this turn back. So our ideas today are reacting to what he is saying, Fedorov is saying. Our status quo is not immobile. Our status quo is movement, is fast movement. So what is permanent change? So what is revolutionary strategy today is a change to no change. And actually it's what Fedorov wants when he speaks about museum. Yeah. It's not a substitution of old things by new things. It's keeping and insisting on keeping the old things in the middle of change. Yeah. Art was always a strategy of care related to strategy of aestheticization. what is art is aesthetization, the act of aesthetization. An act of aesthetization is an act of care at the same time, because it reflects our unwillingness to sacrifice that. Yeah, but we don't want to sacrifice that because we think it's beautiful or important or close to our heart. Yeah, and we want to sacrifice it. And we are living in civilization that want us to sacrifice everything. Yeah, everything. We're living in, they say, you like your own, your old iPhone? No, you need a new one, and so on and so
on. If there is...
Thank you so much for the answer. Congratulations for your work, and hello for everybody.
I do not hear. I do not hear. Can you repeat? I cannot hear.
Sorry, just wanted to say congratulations for your work and thank you for the answer.
Okay.
Could you repeat, because I didn't hear?
Pedro was congratulating you for your work and thanking you for the answer.
Mm-hmm. And answer to what? This answer.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So if there is anyone else who wants to ask a question or raise the hand, feel free, but otherwise I'll ask what could be the final question, unless Alexandra also wants to say something. Professor, in the lecture you gave at the end of the text that you were, at the end of the talk and the text, you made this absolutely beautiful point around human history becoming art history, because human beings will become artworks. And as someone who works in the field of art and who is also challenged by a lot of things within it, I'd like you, if you could just elaborate a little bit on this, because somehow it's a way, it was an end to the text, but it was the beginning of another train of thoughts. And it was quite interesting because you started with biocosmists and biocosmism and the question of what would be the potential achievement of communism or socialist society, and the connection between Russian Cosmism as a project of transformation and Marxism as well, but where are also their differences with terms of engagement with technologies, and then going back through the museum, which you introduced us, but this idea of this kind of it's kind of like, you know, somehow has some Marxist resonance there, human history becoming art history, human beings becoming artworks. So maybe you could just give us a final comment on that, and maybe this is the beginning of a new conversation that we may have in the future.
Yes, you know, some of the ideas that I formulated today are, of course, reactions to the work of Michel Foucault. And Michel Foucault, when he speaks about the clinic, yeah, hospital, he basically compares it to prison, to maybe to labor camp. He doesn't do it, but for example, Agamben does it, and factory and so on and so on. But I always was skeptical about this comparison, and I thought always that clinic, that hospital is like the museum. I always had this feeling. It's that the body of the patient, the human body in the hospital, is like a body of work, a body of the artwork in the museum. Actually, you can find this idea in Heidegger. He speaks about his unwillingness to look at the artwork with the eyes of a charwoman, yeah, as the body of the artwork. He doesn't want to look at the body of the artwork. Like people who are curators who are working in the museum do. They do not look at the artwork as a spectator does. They are insiders who look at the body of the artwork. And that is the same, the curators here, cura. The same is a position of the physician in the hospital. He looks at your body behind the surface that we present to the society. But he looks at this body not to damage it, and not theoretically at least, or not to work with it, or to use it in sexual or other way, but to keep this surface. You know, we have here a paradoxical and maybe impossible, if you want, goal of breaking the surface with a goal to keeping it. And in this relationship, there is a direct analogy between body of human body and the body of the artwork. When we speak about human rights, it's the rights of the artworks, So in the society, you have to look at people, but you cannot touch them or kill them, and so on. So you're behaving in the crowd, in the Western civilization, is the same as you are supposed to behave in a museum, not to touch artwork, not to destroy them, just to look at them, with one exception, curator and physician. And this exception are very similar too. So it seems to me that we are living in a society that more and more is based on medicine, more and more is based on the care, on the concept of care. Not only in hospital, but also, for example, transportation. To care about transportation of people, to care about this, to care about that. This is something that provokes in people dissatisfaction. We see this, for example, demonstration against vaccination also. So we are treated as artwork, not as a tools, but as an artwork with love. But we don't want to treat with love from time to time. We don't want people to be nice to us and to help us and to keep us. That is this kind of strange condition of contemporary society that is described by Hegel and Hegelian protest against the view from outside. However, Hegel writes at the end of his phenomenology that everybody has to accept at the end of history and the end of his own life that the death is the absolute master. So you can protest against everything, but you can't protest against death. Now, medicines protest against death. Art is even more radical protest against death. So we have this kind of infinite, paradoxical, impossible, deeply impossible protest against death. A kind of fight against death, which produce in the subject, in us as subject, very contradictory feeling, because the project itself is very contradictory. It is very paradoxical. So that is this analogy. It's not so. The idea of art history is post-Hegelian idea. Why? Because Hegel was the first who said you have to describe people from the outside. But to describe people from outside means also for us to go inside, like in the museum and like in hospital. Yeah, we have this kind of ambivalent movement, and that's why I think that analogy between the human body and body of the artwork, yeah, is fundamental to understand the strategy of contemporary civilization.
Well, if you don't mind another 5 minutes of your time,
Yeah.
because we, rather than ending with a question around art, I'd like to actually end with a question around the revolution. And we already touched upon the revolution, but you also mentioned in your lecture, when you were exploring the question of around gravity and the culture, the cosmic gravity and the culture of gravity, and you said something like the communist revolution was a revolution against gravity, and therefore it could only fail.
Yeah.
And I was wondering whether you could further explain this. I know that we can't go back to the question around gravity, but that was really an interesting, strong point, because it was not just speculative. It was like an assertion that you were also making in that sense.
It was not me making. It was making. It was made by a Comte, and I quoted Comte. But what's interesting about this quotation and the position of Comte is the fact that the Russians of that time, who read the same book, I quoted, they decided to make a revolution against gravity. So they kind of believed Comte that you cannot make a social revolution without taking in question the cosmic order. That is, of course, a very deep insight into the relationship between social order and cosmic order. And I quoted Lunacharsky because I think that he has right in his immediate reaction to Comte, that we do not tend now to think about cosmos as an order. Yeah, and especially today, we know that everything is on move in cosmic space. Everything is moving. All the objects are moving. Or it's more like this ship, Earth ship, So everything is moving and moving in different directions, and we don't quite understand why they are moving. We have this theory of Big Bang and so on, but it's all unclear. So it's everything looks for us chaotic with black holes and so on and so on, and that opens the way for putting in question the social order. Where there is no cosmic order, there cannot be also social order. I think that is important insight. Social order is an illusion. It's not something that has any ontological reality.
Okay, Alexandra?
Thank you so much. I think I would like to stay with this idea of a body of care. I think that in this pandemic or post-pandemic reality, it's really something that we should, or I would like to continue thinking on, and how can a society of care be considered? And I think this can, open space for other conversations in the future. Thank you very much, Professor Boris Groys.
It was my pleasure, to discuss.
Pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much for everyone who attended and for your contributions. Professor Boris Groys, Anton, thank you so much for the opportunity. It was absolutely fantastic to have you today. Just as a footnote, our series concludes next week, Thursday, 7 p.m. with Professor Michael Marder. And those of you who have interest in SIRIUS or Rampa's programs, you can follow us on social media or check our website, more things to come. Professor Boris Groys, again, thank you so much for your time. Have a nice rest of the day, and I hope we will be in touch again and see each other again soon.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Anton.